What if I told you that Noah did not, by sheer human muscle and plan, collect every animal into the ark, but that something unseen, a quiet authority appointed by God, shepherded them to safety? Imagine for a moment a presence on the plain, not a character to worship, not a rival to God, but an agent carrying out a precise task. This is the untold line of imagination I want to explore with you, the hypothesis that an angelic guardian guided the animals to the ark. Picture the scene. The ark rides low on a washed and darkened plain. Rain has not yet begun in earnest. The sky holds the smell of iron and distant sea. Noah stands at the threshold of a massive opening in the hull, wood still fragrant of pitch and cedar. Men in the nearby village shout and point, mocking the carpenter turned doomsday prophet. In the fields and groves, life shifts. Birds fold their wings and fall into a hush. Herds lift their heads and move in small, intentional clusters. There is the soft, strange sound of paws on sod, careful, not panicked. Through the thin gray of evening, a creature passes close enough to touch the bark. For a moment, predator and prey regard each other, and nothing ignites. Then, as if answering a quiet summons, they come to Noah and enter. If you enjoy careful Bible studies and untold questions like this, subscribe. We read the story in Genesis 6-9. The narrative gives us large movements. God sees the corruption of humanity, decides to send a flood, and tells Noah to build an ark. Then, in terse strokes, the text records animals going into the ark and God shutting the door. Genesis leaves much unsaid, and those silences have long invited readers to ask how such things might have happened. One of the most striking laconic moments is the brief wording that the animals came to Noah and entered. It reads like an economical report of fact, but from a logistical viewpoint it raises a question. How did a world of diverse creatures, predators and prey, converge without descending into chaos? The Bible itself is silent about the mechanism. It tells us what happened, not always how every detail was achieved. But silence invites interpretation, and ancient readers did not leave that silence empty. Across early Jewish readings and in some apocryphal resonances, interpreters imagined that God sometimes employs intermediary agents, angels or administrative forces, to restrain, guide, or shepherd creation during acts of salvation or judgment. These interpretations are traditional reflections, not canonical add-ons. They offer a way of thinking about the text, a hypothesis that explains the narrative's logistics without changing its theological claims. When we say tradition, we must be careful.
By that I mean a range of ancient voices, rabbinic midrash that fills narrative gaps with moral and theological detail, early Jewish imaginative texts that imagine heavenly courts and cosmic watchers, and later Christian reflections that explore how divine power operates through mediators. Some of these sources suggest that the created order can be restrained or directed temporarily by celestial agents. They offer images of beasts passing each other in peace by virtue of a divine decree carried out by a messenger. Again, these are interpretive aids, not scripture. They help us envision plausibility without claiming new revelation. Why is this hypothesis plausible? Start with the narrative phrasing. Genesis is precise in its economy. It takes great space describing the ark's dimensions, the command to Noah, the construction details, the timing of the floodwaters, and then it reduces the arrival of the animals to a compact report. The terseness suggests an assumed mechanism, something the original audience could infer or imagine. The idea that an agent prevented carnivorous instincts for the sake of preservation fits the story's logic. God intends a remnant to survive. God is sovereign over creation. God may use means he wills, including intermediaries, to bring about that intention. Imagine the ark plane again, this time zoomed in on smaller details. The air tastes of tar and wet timber. A rat creaks as another animal steps in, hay dust rising like faint smoke. A fox slips past a grazing ox, ears tilted, but the fox does not seek to hunt. The ox, breathing warm, damp breath, does not startle. Deer move through the reeds with a quiet that is nearly human. A dog-like animal pauses on the threshold, sniffs, and then allows itself to be led. Somewhere above, wings beat without thunder, a wing beat that carries more regulation than spectacle. Villagers stand at a distance, mouths open, feeling an odd compulsion to remain still. Some later recall a sense like a hush settling over the whole land. None of this invents new events. It only imagines how the biblical facts might have been executed in a world where God employs means consistent with his character. The role of an angelic agent in this hypothesis is fundamentally functional.
Think of angels in Scripture. They appear as messengers, protectors, worshipers, and executors of God's will. They act at God's command and under God's authority. In the ark scenario, the angel would not be an independent actor with personal agendas. The angel would be an instrument, a steward of the divine command to preserve, carrying out a specific administrative role, to restrain the chaotic impulses that would frustrate the saving purpose. That keeps the theology sound. Sovereignty stays with God. The angel remains servant. Ancient traditions provide color to this idea without imposing it.
Certain rabbinic accounts in some strands of early Jewish imagination describe moments when the natural order is temporarily controlled. Pseudepigraphical texts, while varied and not canonical, show a broader cultural imagination at work about heavenly beings interacting with the material world. Church fathers occasionally speculated about the angelic role in salvation history. All of this helps us see how first readers might have filled narrative lacunae. The key is to treat these voices as suggestive commentary, useful for imagination and for pastoral reflection, not as obligatory belief. There is a narrative pivot that gives the hypothesis even greater theological resonance. The Lord shut him in. The closing of the ark's door marks a decisive moment. Scripture records that God himself shut the door after Noah and his family had entered. That divine action both secures the preservation and signals closure. If an angel's temporary stewardship guided creation into the ark, the closing of the door indicates the cessation of that special restraint. The created order, held in a kind of suspended peace, is sealed. The space of grace is closed to further entrance. Judgment resumes its rightful course outside. The moment is heavy with pastoral meaning. There is an appointed time for mercy and an appointed time for judgment. The guardian's work, if indeed there was one, served a merciful but limited function. This helps us see the theological economy in clearer terms. God judges and God preserves. These are not contradictory but complementary. Preservation is not arbitrary favoritism detached from holiness. It is an expression of God's covenantal faithfulness and redemptive purpose accomplished amid judgment. The hypothetical angel is an instrument of that fidelity. The theological posture here is not mysticism, but reverent humility. God is sovereign, and sometimes that sovereignty is mediated, as Scripture itself demonstrates in many contexts. Now consider Jesus' words. He warns that the coming days will be like the days of Noah, a phrase recorded in Matthew 24 and in Luke 17. Those sayings are stark. They say life will go on, people will eat and drink, and then judgment will arrive unexpectedly. What does the angelic guardian hypothesis add to Jesus' analogy? It sharpens the sense of urgency without supplying a secret manual for survival. If in Noah's time an unseen hand guided the means of preservation, then two lessons follow. First, divine preservation can operate in ways we do not see. We should cultivate sober awareness rather than frantic searching for signs. Second, the closing of the door is a sober reminder that there are boundaries to God's mercy. It will not be indefinitely extended when human refusal or corruption draws the present age to judgment. In short, be vigilant but not fearful. Prepare but not superstitiously attempt to manipulate heavenly forces. From a pastoral perspective, this balance matters.
Many modern readers live under two temptations: either to spiritualize everything into private mysticism, searching for secret angelic interventions as personal guarantees, or to secularize everything into blind materialism, dismissing any role for divine agency. The Genesis story resists both extremes. It invites sober attention to God's ways and humble trust in the means he may appoint. Part of living rightly, then, is to cultivate three practical habits that follow from the hypothesis without making the hypothesis a requirement. First, vigilance without paranoia. Jesus' warning in Matthew 24 and Luke 17 calls for watchfulness, not an anxious scanning of the skies for spectacular signs, but a spiritual readiness that deepens prayer, compassion, and holy living. Practical vigilance looks like ethical faithfulness, loving neighbors, seeking justice, confessing sin, and staying rooted in Scripture. If something unseen preserves, gratitude is the posture, not bargaining or fear. Second, gratitude for unseen preservations. Most of God's work in the world does not trumpet itself. We are preserved, healed, and guided in ways we often cannot trace. Learning to name and thank God for these hidden mercies reshapes our spiritual life. It cultivates a quiet humility that recognizes we live under providence bigger than our immediate grasp. Third, avoid freezing tradition into doctrine. Ancient readings that imagine angelic agency are valuable for imagination and pastoral insight, but they must not be elevated into mandatory belief. The Bible itself remains the norm. If the angel guardian hypothesis helps us make sense of a textual silence, hold it gently as interpretive furniture, useful for thought and devotion, but removable if further study suggests other explanations. Maintain critical discernment. Tradition illuminates, Scripture governs. Let us return to the plain for one last, more focused vignette. Twilight. Thin rain at the horizon.
a hush like the breath before a congregation sings. Noah stands on the threshold, family behind him, animals moving, each of them oddly calm. An unseen agency holds instinct at bay. The ark is a mobile temple, a vessel of divine presence traveling through chaos toward covenant renewal. When God shuts the door, the hush is no longer needed. The world outside resumes its moral trajectory, and the ark becomes a seedbed for new creation. The anonymous agent, if there was one, has performed an administrative stewardship and departs, its task complete. The story ends not with the angel's applause, but with God's covenantal presence sustaining human and animal life anew. A couple of cautions as we finish. Do not treat this hypothesis as a magic formula. It does not tell us how to call angels or manipulate divine action. It does not promise immediate material perks for those who believe.
Instead, it offers an interpretive frame that helps us read Genesis with theological imagination, humble curiosity, and pastoral sobriety. Also, respect the distinction between Scripture and later traditions. Read Genesis 6-9 for the core narrative. Read Matthew 24 and Luke 17 for the eschatological echo. Then read tradition, midrashic reflections, pseudepigraphal imaginations, and patristic musings for enrichment, knowing these are illuminations, not additions to canon. So what is the pastoral takeaway? First, be vigilant in the way Jesus teaches, living a life of prayer, justice, and sobriety. Second, cultivate gratitude for the many unseen ways God preserves His people, resisting both fear and entitlement. Third, hold ancient traditions with respect, but not coercion. Allow them to spark imagination while remaining accountable to Scripture. If the angel hypothesis is true, and remember it is a plausible reading, not a declared doctrine, it gives us a humbling image. A brief, faithful stewardship by an anonymous agent, a temporary easing of the created orders so that a remnant could be kept. That image carries a quiet hope. Even in judgment, God can and does preserve a seed. It also carries a sober warning. There are appointed boundaries to opportunities. The ark's door closing is a theological punctuation mark we would do well to heed. I invite you to explore the primary texts for yourself. Read Genesis 6-9 carefully and slowly. Compare Jesus' sayings in Matthew 24 and Luke 17. Then, if you wish, read some rabbinic midrash and early Jewish imaginative texts with the careful eye of a curious but disciplined reader. Let tradition provoke questions, not settle them. If this idea has stirred your imagination, share it with someone who loves Scripture. Leave your own hypothesis in the comments. How do you picture the plane that day? Do you lean toward a natural explanation, a mediated one, or another reading entirely? Above all, return to the text and let it teach you. The ark remains, above all, a testament to God's mercy in the midst of judgment, and an invitation to live wisely in light of that truth.